As an entrepreneur, I get into a I know it all mode when I'm moving in a direction and I got that energy going, get out of my way. And then there's a moment where I trip and fall, and then I'm looking for ideas, I'm looking for help, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And what I've learned is that approach actually doesn't work as well as I thought it did. Um, and Sharon and I have known each other for a couple of years now, and she's been a big part of getting me out of a way of living and emotive thinking that really wasn't serving me as well as it should have. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about it's about my dark night of the soul journey, but not really. It's more about how belief systems really work. Um, Sharon, what do you think? How do belief systems work?
Well, first, I'm remembering when we very first started working together and where you were at. And I want to add the caveat that you had the willingness to change. You were open and willing. And that's a humongous part of this, because if somebody's shut down, they can never take in what's being offered to them. And I know you know this now. And you and I have discussed that that sort of accelerated your path going forward over the next couple of years. You redefined, redesigned, etc. And in working with you and other clients, it really, and this is just my own personal experience too, I had such an unhappy life and just attracted one thing after another that I didn't like. And that's what led me on my own trajectory to improve the quality of my life. And I did that by exploring different books, different authors, taking bits and pieces, the work of Scott Killaby and some others. But when I really landed on the work of Byron Katie, that was a game changer for me. It's so simple. It's uncover those underlying beliefs that we don't even realize we have, and that 99% of the time we generated them in childhood. But then as we grow up, we're blaming outside of ourselves for what's really we're responsible for. And as we started working together, and I had you do an initial exercise that pulled out a lot of those underlying beliefs right away. And then we started working on them one at a time. And as we did that, and as I did it in my own path journey here, we just learned they weren't true. I mean, the opposite actually turned out to be true. I am this awesome person. I'm not that terrible person I believe. I am lovable. I'm not the unlovable being that I believed I was for so long. I do deserve nice things instead of believing all those nice things were for somebody else. And it was life changing for me. It was life changing for you. And it's been life
Yeah.
changing for others that I've worked with. And the more we uncover and find the truth, the more all the old minutia drops away. That's been my experience. The people that I used to attract into my life, I no longer attract. I attract people that are more like how I am today instead of how I used to be.
Well,
I,
let's go back to Byron Katie because
yeah,
people don't maybe not understand this. And I'm going to talk about different modalities as well, because I think I've done all of them at this point.
yes, you have.
So I've done a lot of them, and you have too. And so there's a man by the name of Steve Hardison, and his wife, Amy, wrote a book called The Ultimate Coach. And if anybody out there is a coach, Steve, in a way, invented the modern coaching industry. So the modern coaching industry, a lot of it came from, where did all these people come from? Well, Steve Hardison was a big part of it. And then his proteges, Rich Litvin and
Yep.
Steve Chandler wrote a book called The Prosperous Coach, which really broadcast out these approaches. That's called real coaching. So that's deep. Where did it come from? Byron Katie.
Yeah.
So Byron Katie was Steve Hardison's mentor, and you studied with her.
Well, yes, I don't want to say mentor because Katie never assumes that kind of role. Katie is not a guru, not a
Right.
mentor. What she really does is she just offers the process of 4 questions and 3 turnarounds, and it's not always 3 turnarounds, and the invitation to inquire on the thoughts that cause you to suffer. It's that simple. And in that process of inquiry, it's can you know that what you're believing in the moment is true, and it's either a yes or a no. And the second question is, can you absolutely know that what you're believing is true? And when you ponder that question, when you get still for a moment, then you can usually find that no, I can't absolutely 100% know that's true. And for me, the meat and potato part is that next question: how do I react, and what happens when I believe that? And when one gets still enough, you can find all the ways these things are happening in split seconds. I shut down, I put up an invisible wall, I treat them like the enemy, I treat myself like a victim, and it just goes on. Who am I in that same situation, same moment in time, without that thought? Oh, let's look at that. And then we get into the turnarounds, the opposite to the other and to the self. And this is a process that Steve just went through repeatedly, just like I did and like others. And Katie just smiles and she holds the space for us to find our own way. And as a result, Steve found his way into the enormous coaching industry that he does now. And he's very good at it. He charges a ton of money for it too. And then, as you mentioned, Rich became a student of his, and he's very well known. And he too charges a small fortune to coach people.
A small fortune. And one of the things about this, I think in our society now, as I've observed, is the simplicity of all this. And, your ability to help me get to the truth, hold my feet to the fire, not allow my mind tricks to distract without you using a canned method led to permanent change.
Yes.
And one of the things you and I worked out as I was helping you with your coaching business after you got kind of crushed by the marketing industry
Yes.
and spent too much money on that,
Indeed.
is this idea of the method. And, coming up with the method as a expert in holding space for
Yes.
people and knowing how to ask the right questions. The only way you can do that is if you do it yourself.
Correct.
You did the work yourself. That's why you can do it. If you haven't, you can't.
Correct. Correct. And I will add that in my method, while I largely facilitate the work of Byron Katie, I use some of my own intuition, and I've added something to it where we can bring out those underlying beliefs much more quickly, like in the
Mm.
first session, actually. So
Yeah.
we now know what it is we're going to work on, and that doesn't take so long for people to get to where they want to go. And you're right, it is you have to experience it personally. You can't just describe a blue sky. You have to see that shade of blue for yourself, right? You have to experience these things. And that's exactly what you did. It's exactly what I did. And threw some other things into the mix along the way. Others' teachings, Gail. Well, I came into Red Pill Pathway um, as a founding member, and I'm very grateful to you for that. Because what that allowed me to do was mix with Brian and Gail and Florian and others that have been a part of this as well. And in the morning, in the More Money Now, in particular meetings, as I listened to the others and we talked about just things that crop up in our journeys. And there's no pressure in this, it's just a conversation that we have. And I started to realize that I was resisting promoting a particular facet of my business.
Mm.
And then I relaxed into that and I thought, why am I resisting this? Let me take that to inquiry, which I did. And I thought, it doesn't make any difference in the bigger picture because my goal has always been to serve and help others. And that's based on my own personal experience and then noticing others are suffering too, and in my opinion, needlessly. All they need to do is this simple process and do it repeatedly, just repeatedly. That's it. Rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. And your life absolutely, it's impossible for it not to change if you do that. It's just
I,
impossible.
I think you said something really important, and that is going to be illustrated in some examples because it's one thing just to say things, but it's another to explain the experience of it. So, for example, years and years ago, I used modalities from a system called Feeling Good. So, this is mindset work. So, I also used a lot from Dale Carnegie around being able to manage my mind contents. And I got really good at it. The reason I got really good at it was if I didn't, I would collapse. I had to do it. So I was in a psychiatric hospital as a result of too many cold calls. It's a longer story, but I was pushing myself to the brink to succeed. And I did. And I did succeed. And I closed this huge deal. And I thought, I can't do this anymore, but I had to. And I collapsed. I had a new job offer worked out because I thought I got to get out of this company I'm in, even though I just closed an almost $1 million deal for them. And I got to get into this new company. I got the job offer and I ended up in a psychiatric hospital. And I called my boss from the hospital. And I was like, Todd, I don't know if I can start on Monday. I didn't tell him where I was. I just said, hey, I got something going on. I'm holding David Burns. I think his name is David Burns, right? Is that right? Book, Feeling Good, going through the mental processes to organize my mind to the point where I could have that conversation by myself another week. Took that job and I worked through it and then I was fine. That is a way of doing it. Now we're talking about something a little different here.
Very different, very different. And, I heard or read something recently, and it so resonated with me. From the time that we are very young, we begin to be judged by others on what we do, on our performance, rather than who we are. And so we learn from a very early age that we are expected to perform. And that starts us seeking outside for more. Oh, if I make a lot of money, then I'll be fine. If I get the great house, I'll be okay then. If I do this, if I do that, I'll feel better about myself. And frankly, that's all, in my opinion, in my experience, that's all BS. Having any of that stuff never makes one feel better. You can be a billionaire and be the loneliest person on the planet. So what I've come to understand is what people are like, I just want peace. I just want peace. Well, what does peace mean? Really, what people are looking for are peaceful thoughts. And the way I've learned to get those is by inquiring, by finding those underlying beliefs that have been running my life. And once I let those go, then my life starts to line up in the way that I've always wanted it to. And it's sort of that letting go that allows exactly what I've always wanted to
And
come
let
in.
me give an example of that because I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, the idea of peaceful thoughts is not what they want. So for me, as an entrepreneur, I didn't connect peaceful thoughts to making my vision realize itself in the world in a concrete way based on what I saw in my imagination was going to happen and it has to happen or I'm going to go crazy. Now, what you're talking about reminds me of one of my favorite Sharon Valenti stories, which was in early 2023 when I was still trying to force Solopreneur Inc. to work. I had set up a school community, Sam Ovens software. I'd set up a thing called the Solopreneur Inc. Virtual Campus. I'd been running an event for a few years. So I had a list of thousands of people. I had hundreds of guest speakers. And I thought, I'm going to fill up this community. I'm going to make a ton of money. And I'll have a really solid platform for my entrepreneur adventures. It's going to be great. So I launched the thing in January. I'd spent almost a year and a half doing all the Napoleon Hill stuff. And I mean, I'm doing everything, right? I did Law of Attraction, working through Law of Attraction books, the whole thing. And so been getting up at 5 a.m. every morning, doing an inner meditative practice and a walk every day for 30 minutes. And I'm creating my own modality of the whole thing. And I'm walking around the park and I'm listening to Jack Cornfield on a podcast. And he's telling a story of being in the jungles, in Southeast Asia. Ansan Chow, I think, was his mentor. who checks in on him and says, "Hey, Jack, how's it going?" And he said, "Well, outside of dying from malaria right now, I'm doing okay." He says, "Joel, you're doing great." And I remember having this feeling of, oh my God, there's more here in me. And I collapsed into that feeling and I lost it emotionally. And I just like bottomed out. And I was like, boy, I hope nobody sees me weeping, a grown man walking down the street at 5 a.m., just like tears coming out of just collapsing into this emotion. And we had a call, I think, later that day. And you're like, yeah, there's more thoughts there.
And there are, and Larry. So when I talk about make the statement peaceful thoughts, I'm talking about, so often people will say, well, I don't feel good enough. I'm not good enough. Well, that's a really broad statement. Let's dig down. What's reflected back to you about you? And it'll come down to, that person disrespected me. I feel disrespected. I feel unlovable. I feel unimportant. I feel ignored. Are those peaceful thoughts? Hell no, they're not peaceful thoughts. So when you do the work and you inquire on it and you really examine it, you'll see that that was never true, but that has been unconsciously running your show. The
Yeah.
minute you let that thought go, a change happens. To me, that's a moment of enlightenment.
Yeah.
For me, enlightenment is letting go of those self-taught beliefs I've had about myself. That's the moment. Oh, here's the truth. Here's the truth. And you're a truth teller and a truth seeker. I know that about you.
Mhm.
And that's where your willingness came in. I'm a no BS person, as you know, and
I've noticed.
I called you like that. I called you every time. And you were willing to just be there with that for a minute, find it in yourself and say, yeah, okay, I got it now. And you released it. And it is in the releasing of all those things, Larry, that has led you to Red Pill Pathway,
Yeah.
creating that and the whole campus and all the wonderful people that are involved in it and all of the different opportunities that Red Pill Pathway offers people. And I don't know this to be true, but I feel it is. Had you not have done that earlier work, you wouldn't have gotten where you are now with this. And this
Mhm.
is very right and very right for you. And yes, you've probably still got, because it takes a long time and we all do, still some underlying beliefs running there, but you now have the tool, you have that process, you can question it yourself. It's nice when we work together, but you don't need me to do this. You now know how to do this, and you can
Yes.
do it pretty quickly.
Well, let me explain that to people. So, in my own background, I started doing Secrets of the Temple martial arts, energy work when I was in my 20s. I did shadow work weekends with men's warrior groups for years. It's embodiment kind of stuff, embodiment release. I've done a lot of different things. And what's different about these approaches we're talking about is the changes become permanent. So the idea of preparation to get to this thing led me to think, wait a minute, what if instead of all that preparation, you just started here and got into this, what is actually true approach? And I call this lowering the parking brake. So the parking brake is locking in on these thoughts and saying they're real when they're not real. Well, how do I solve that dilemma? In our society, we work harder on our mindset, or we try to take ayahuasca, or go on retreat, or we try to do plant-based medicines, or whatever, because we're seeking enlightenment, we're seeking answers. And I was like, that's not how it works. So if I lower the parking brake, all of a sudden I'm releasing myself to allow the truth of these thoughts to come deeper toward me, and then I can release them as I know them. And that's what happened.
If I may, I'd like to give an example that may clarify this a little further. So I was working with a client, and he was feeling stuck in his career. He felt he should be farther along in his career than where he is. And so we started working together, and a few sessions in, he told me about a moment in time where he'd gone over to his friend's house to hang out, and later his mother and sister came to pick him up. And when he got in the car, his mother said, "Well, it's just the three of us now." And what that meant was that their father had walked out on the family.
Ah,
And he recalls in that moment thinking two things. Well, this is just how my life is going to be now. And I wasn't important enough for him to have wanted to stay. So as we worked through this, I was able to help him see his father's leaving had nothing to do with him. His father was following his own heart's desire and his own dreams, which happened to be another woman, and had nothing to do with this young boy. And I watched the physical shift in him when that hit home with him. He finally understood. He was able to let that go. Now, in the letting go of that belief, that there are two beliefs. This is how, my lot in life, so to speak, and I'm to blame. It's my fault that he left. I'm not good enough for him to have stayed. That also helped in his career path, because that I'm not good enough, I'm not enough, I'm unimportant was showing up unconsciously and energetically in work. And this is the subtlety of doing the work. It just releases in ways that we just never expect. And it's fascinating and fabulous.
it's fascinating, and the interconnectedness of all of these different systems is so important, and that's a big part of the entrepreneur experience campus concept.
Yeah.
So, for example, what you're talking about led me different places. So, one of the things that happened is the onion peeled,
Mm.
and I got to a point where there wasn't any onion left. And I'm like, I can't find any more beliefs. I'm like, I'm rattling around in my own mind trying to find. Well, what I found was an acorn, and I'm like, oh, they're in the acorn. Okay, well, how do you examine beliefs and release them if they're inside of an acorn? That is not the same as an onion. Now, this is going to be confusing for people to understand who have not experienced this. However, what I can say is that there's other ways of getting at the same thing. So as we were working on things and I got into that acorn, I thought, all right, something else has to happen here.
Yeah.
Well, Brian Muka, with the energy work he does and the invincibility dojo work, because I do so much energy work myself, again, the same with the openness to truth. I was open to energy flow looked at differently. And when I started working with Brian, that acorn started opening, and his ability to be energetically attuned with me and know what those you could still call them beliefs, whatever you want to call it. We started calling them smoke monsters. Whatever those smoke monsters are, release them. I couldn't do it myself, but I could do it with him, and they released.
How wonderful. I mean, it's wonderful. And Gail, I know Gail has a couple of modalities that she does, including the
That
including,
was another. I was going to go there next.
including the Akashic Records. And I also read Akashic Records, but Gail
Mhm.
also helps people make tremendous breakthroughs in her processes as well. So collectively, there's a sparkling group in Red Pill Pathway all working together in one of the most harmonious environments I've experienced. And each one of those, I use EFT in addition. I love emotional freedom tapping. I just love it because I'll just be going through the different words, and there's a couple of people that I follow on YouTube with that. And
So let me just explain Sharon. Sharon knows more than anyone I have ever met, ever read about all of these different things. Every time I talk to her, there's another thing. So explain what is EFT?
okay, please know I never bill myself as a know-it-all. I'm not, and far from it. I
No,
saw.
you're not, but you actually know. People who know don't say they know. That's the
Okay,
difference between gurus and sages, because gurus say they know, sages don't exist. You
okay.
can't be a sage. You can only transmit wisdom.
So emotional freedom tapping is a process of tapping on various parts of the body, usually the upper body, where you're hitting some acupressure points, and you're saying specific phrases as even though I'm unhappy with how I behaved earlier, I still love and accept myself. And you'll
Mm,
go through these different points of tapping, and it releases you more than likely will experience a release. And when I say that, you may feel emotion coming up, like you want to burst out in tears.
mhm.
You don't have to do anything further than that. That release is taking place of its own accord, and it will go. And you're rating yourself at the beginning on a scale of 10 to 1, 10 being feeling it the most extreme. And it's another wonderful modality out there. And I, like you, I don't think there's just
No,
one way of doing things. I think the combination of the things that feel right for you will be your own success story. For me, the work of Byron Katie was probably the most life changing,
yeah,
and now that work works in me. I still do it, but it's already. I don't even get into the deep doo doo anymore. The work is already nipped it in the bud for me
you just do it. And
because I take ownership. I'm doing it to me, not somebody else. But man, all those years it was your fault, and your fault. Now I know better than that. It's all my thinking is creating havoc, and that's where you've heard me say many, many times. In this lifetime, my personal goal is to become the master of my thinking rather than my thinking keep mastering me. And that simply means being aware of what's going on in my head and stopping it before it gets too carried away.
it's incredibly simple, and it's
Yes,
about expertise. And Gail, and I understand Akashic records too, and I understand channeling, and I've done all of that, and it's not for me. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to teach it. It's not my expertise, but understand it. I know a lot about it. Gail is a master librarian in the Akashic record. So in Next Level Living, when I did stuff with Gail, um, the what she calls a soul alignment um, is a release of attachments of thinking systems and processes I can't even begin to even conceptualize.
right.
So the whole idea is don't. So the thinking processor getting in the way is me interfering.
Mm.
And this is, I have to say, I'm going to say this. We only have 3 more minutes. I'm going to say the most important thing I think we're going to say right now to entrepreneurs is you're screwing yourself up. The parking brake that's coming on all the time with you charging forward with the part. What I did, I pulled the parking brake up. I'm going to make it happen. And I ran forward as fast as possible. And then I wondered why things were hard.
Right.
And I succeeded a lot of the times. And then I got what I wanted. And I'm like, okay, now I can coast for a little while. Lowered the parking brake, got another vision, another idea. I'm like, oh my God, I got to do this. I got to go here. I got to go here. This is great. This is so exciting. The minute I do that, boom, the parking brake comes back up again. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way to do this.
Yeah.
And it turns out there is.
Yeah. That self talk is vital to pay attention to because so often we are criticizing ourselves repeatedly. And I personally, for me, I'm removing the word failure out of my vocabulary because it's a harsh word for me. And instead, it's just simply an experiment for me. Just like Edison, you know how many hundreds of thousands of experiments he did? And he
Mm.
didn't look at it as failure. It was like, oh, that experiment didn't work. Let's try another one. Let's try another one. Let's try. That is all life is to me, is an experiment. And if I control my thoughts, pay attention to how harshly I'm treating myself at times, and stop it and be kinder, then my life continues on the trajectory I want it to be on.
I'm so excited about what's going on with you, Sharon. And just so people know, Sharon and I have been working on her coaching business for a couple of years now.
Yep.
And it was, how do you make the transition out of being a marketer? How do you make the transition out of, I got to go get clients? How do you make the transition out of being a networker? Because you don't want to do any of that stuff.
I don't.
And it took a long time,
Yeah.
to get to this. And I couldn't plunk you over there and say, hey, try it this way. It was a lot of trial and error, and then the idea of partnerships and working together with people within the Byron Katie community as she retired, and doing things off of our campus, and deciding, I'm not going to go forward with the whole founding member thing, was the success.
It absolutely was. And I do workshops monthly, weekly with other certified facilitators of the work. And it's a lot of fun. And it's what I love doing. So I am literally not only living a life I love, but I'm doing work that I truly love and can't wait for the next workshop kind of thing. So
Yeah.
living in my excitement, and that feels awesome.
I
Yeah.
love you, Sharon. Thank you so much for what you did for me.
My pleasure. Thank you for being open to it. You did it. I just was there to